Okay, welcome back to another Authors at Crystal Lake, and today we are talking about another Dark Tide anthology, Dark Tide 17, Creatures of the Night. And we have two of the authors here with us today because unfortunately the internet will not cooperate and let us include the third one. So I'm going to let our two authors introduce themselves. So take it away, and we'll start with Kevin.
Hi there, I'm Kevin J. Kennedy. I'm the author of Halloween Land and I also run KJK Publishing. Most people probably know the horror collection series that we put out.
Okay, Gord.
Hello. I've written about 10 or 11 novels, and I've published about 23 books now with short story collections and some novellas. I actually live in Canada, so I'm the only one of the three authors in this collection, Creatures of the Night, that does live out of Britain, but I am a British citizen, a dual citizen, Canadian-British, and I'm thrilled to be part of this.
Okay, and the third author in the collection is Simon Clark, and as I said, unfortunately, he couldn't make it today. So, how did you guys get involved in the project?
I had spoken to Joe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this. Is it Joe Mindhart? Is that how you say his name? His surname?
I think it's close enough.
I'd spoke to Joe. Obviously, Crystal Lake Publishing. I'd followed them for years, and I spoke to Joe a few times, and I'd mentioned that I loved the Dark Tide series, and I didn't know he had kind of set up 20 books and who was going to be the authors for each of them. I just said, if you're ever looking for new authors for any of the books, I'd love to be involved. And I think round about that time, one of the authors or two of the authors on one of the books had kind of pulled out for one reason or another. And luckily, I get the opportunity. And all the books have got three authors. I think maybe one's got four. And it was who to invite along. So I invited two of my favourite horror authors along, which was Gord and Simon, who unfortunately can't be here. And I was lucky enough that they both accepted and we got to work together.
Okay, hold that thought. Okay, so how did you get involved, Gord? I mean, of course, Kevin invited you, but what was your reaction?
It's actually quite a coincidental thing because Joe is an influential guy, so he's been talking to people for a while. He's been around a long time, and I've known him for quite a while. And we've always sort of talked about having the opportunity to work together on something soon. And it was always sort of, we will do it one of these days, but it never really seemed to happen. And then when Kevin approached me with this, because I've been working with Kevin a bit on, submitting to some of his anthologies that he's been releasing. So that's how I got to know Kevin. So when he gave me the opportunity to join in here, and of course, when I heard Simon was into, because I've been a big fan of Simon's forever, friends with him for quite a while now, and the thought that I could then finally fulfill the commitment to Joe, saying, "Hey, yeah, we're going to definitely work together one of these days," and this has turned out to be it, and it turned out really well.
Okay, and as you can see, Simon has arrived. His internet is stabilized, so we're going to let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I'm Simon Clark. I've been writing horror fiction forever. I mean, I think I've been making stories up since I could actually speak. It's a few years ago now, Kev, isn't it, that when you asked me to contribute some stories to your anthologies, your brilliant anthologies. So I've been contributing for a while for Kev's books. And then, if memory serves me right, Kev got in touch and said, would like to contribute a novella to a Crystal Lake publication, and I'd be working with Kev himself and with Gordon. There's no resistance on my part. Instantly I just said yes, let's do it. So I was just so thrilled to be on board.
Okay, and we're finally glad to have you in the interview. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I sort of keep evaporating. I don't know what it is. I think my computer's steam driven and it probably needs another shovel full of coal on. Goodness knows what's happening.
Okay, so give everybody listening an interview of your novella, and we'll start with Simon in case he disappears again. So,
Yeah. So what was that? You want me to talk a bit about the novella?
yeah, tell us what it's about.
Yeah, I just got a little blip on there. Well, years ago, going back to the mid 1990s. Sorry, I was just using the Kindle here. In the mid 1990s, I wrote a vampire novel called Vampyrrhic, and I wrote it at the time when people said, "Oh, vampires have had it. You know, they're not popular anymore." But I persisted. I wrote Vampyrrhic. I thought I'll just create my own kind of vampires, very vicious, nasty vampires. Wrote that. The book was a big success. There were some spin-off novels. And then when Kev said, "Yeah, shall we write a vampire novella?" And again, it was one of these things that just popped straight into my head. I'll revisit the world of Vampyrrhic because I created basically Viking vampires as set the novel in my home county of Yorkshire, and I thought, well, I just love to return to that mythos that I'd created, and so that was a jumping off point for the novella. And it was very strange. It was like putting on a pair of comfortable shoes that I hadn't worn for years, and thought, well, this is comfortable. I'm back where I belong. So I really did enjoy writing the novella. I've set it back in the fictional town of Leppington, in the equally fictional station hotel. But I've introduced some different characters this time, but I've brought back the old vampires.
Yeah, Viking vampires sounds very interesting to me. I'm just letting you know that. So, Kevin, what's your novella about?
So, as Simon said, we had kind of all agreed between us that we would quite enjoy writing a vampire novel, and the three is all like vicious vampires. So, I quite like that. I used to love Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. I like different type of vampires, but I really enjoy reading vampires in a sort of modern setting. So, um, I've done what I always do, put wee parts of my own life in. For the last 2 years, I've been back at the gym quite a lot, and that's what started off in the sort of gym setting, doing, with the main character doing similar things to I'd done. And then he gets bitten by a vampire, and they kind of go travelling together, and it's a sort of normal type of relationship. And then things get a bit wild. They meet a couple, a werewolf couple, and then a body as they sort of try to settle into a normal life, or as normal as a vampire life can be. They got a body left in their door, and then they got a letter inviting them to come to an address. Decide that they better sort of contact their werewolf friends, and the two vampires and the two werewolves go along to find out what's going on. And things go a bit mental for there. I don't want to sort of waste too much of the story, but it's quite a lot of fighting and sort of brutal stuff. Bit of splatterpunk vampire story probably. So that's that's the road I took.
Oh, that's a good tagline of a punk vampire story.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so what's your novella about, Gord?
Okay, my novella is called Beneath Still Waters. It's something that I've had, I suppose, on the back burner for a long time, probably 15 years or so. I am a trained scuba diver, so I do write a lot of fiction and underwater fiction. I tend to find there's a lot of people have a lot of fear about in the dark and in the cold and in the claustrophobicness of being underwater. And I always had this idea. Again, I was going to write wanted to write a vampire story in some vein, pardon the pun, but everything's been done kind of, or I thought everything's kind of been done. It's hard to find something truly unique. So just because I had the background in the scuba diving and things, I thought I'm going to write an underwater vampire, and on sort of just saying that it sounds kind of stupid, an underwater vampire. But I did find an old Native American legend that really played into it, and it got my mind really spinning on it. And it's something I've wanted to write for a long time, and just never. Again, one of those things never got around to. I always had other projects on the go, and when I was approached here, and we decided we batted around quite a few ideas, what we were going to do as far as our three novellas. And when we did finally settle on trying to make some vicious vampires, I thought that automatically, this is what popped into my head. I was going to finally write this story that's I've had kind of playing around within my ears for the last 10 or 15 years. So, and it's funny, it turned out different than I thought it was going to be, but um, and I said it in your neck of the woods, small town, Nova Scotia, which I've never been to, but I enjoy writing about places and doing some research in places I've never been to before. So
Yeah, it's interesting that your setting take place in like a abandoned mine that collapsed as well, because we've got quite a bit of history with that in Nova Scotia, so that's
yeah,
kind of fascinating.
yeah, I did a lot of research on the mining industry in Nova Scotia, of course, the gypsum mining, and I was totally blown away to find out that they're one of the biggest producers of drywall in the
Yeah.
world for
Yeah,
such
you
a
live
small
in
little
Nova
area.
Scotia, you kind of forget that really
Yeah.
because it's just
Yeah, it
so,
was
so
very
much.
surprising to me to learn it, and just and that's how you build your story, right? You start getting those little pieces of real information, and it starts to go from there. But yeah, as soon as I had my mine and operation and a flood in it, and then I had a basically a fresh like a lake there that people were using as a swimming hole, I thought, well, what if something's in that? Something's in at the bottom of that lake, right? Where's that story take me, right? So that's what Beneath Still Waters is about.
Okay, so what appeals to you about writing in the world of vampires?
You talking to me still, or?
Any one of you?
Yeah. Well, I can start. I'm already speaking. I may as well keep going. I think as horror writers, well, I guess I should just stick to myself. I've always loved the classics, right? I grew up on a lot of the original horror stuff, the Frankensteins, the Draculas, the werewolves, all that kind of things. Creature from the Black Lagoon, all that kind of stuff really appeals to me. I've always loved that, and I've sort of slowly been trying to write stories about all that. I did write a book called The Jigsaw Man, which was my take on Frankenstein and body part transplants and things like that. And this is sort of my vampire version of the classic monster, right? And but I think there is an appeal as a horror writer to sort of revisit horror's roots, at least for me. And the classic stuff really appeals to me a lot.
Okay, what appeals to you, Simon, about writing about vampires?
I totally agree with God. I mean, probably my first experience of vampires, not in real life, of course, is watching the old Universal movies and the old Hammer horror movies. In fact, I just recently watched the Universal version of Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and also the Spanish version, which is fascinating to see, and probably ignited my my interest in vampires again. Well, for me, I wasn't so keen on the suave romantic vampire. Going back to Vampyrrhic, when I decided to try and reinvent the vampire for myself as much as anything, I thought I'd make the vampires nasty again, almost basically like land sharks. They prowl the night, but they just run on instinct. There's no real intellect there, no brain, and they're just simply going out looking for blood. And so again, I was looking at, well, what kind of vampires would there be? What would they look like? And I thought, well, I'm not going to go down the route of the Romanian vampire. Where I come from, it's like an old, Scandinavian area. It was colonized by the Vikings and invaded by the Vikings. And I started reading about Viking mythology, and I thought, well, I'll make my vampires, Viking vampires, are from the tradition of Norse mythology. Basically, the idea is that when Christianity came to Britain, the Norse mythology was kicked out and considered obsolete, and Christianity was embraced. But the idea is that the Norse gods are really, as you can imagine, really annoyed by this. So they create a vampire army, and the vampire army that they put under this fictional town of Leppington in a maze of tunnels, and there they lurk, and then they prey on people. But a bit of a twist to that, as I was reading the Viking mythology, I read a legend where some Viking dragons kind of auto-generate on the battlefield when corpses are piled up after a battle. The corpses undergo some kind of metamorphosis and fuse and become these vile dragons. So I decided to use this, but also bring in this creature called Hellsphere, which is an amalgam of Viking corpses and modern corpses. All quite grisly, really. But they have Viking, instead they have vampire instincts as well. So I've got the individual two-legged vampires, but also I've got this huge creature that's bigger than an elephant that is composed of interwoven corpses, but they still have vampire instincts and still pursue people, drink blood, and so on.
Wonderful bedtime reading.
Yes, have sweet dreams tonight, people.
Okay, what appeals to you, Kevin, about
It's sweet
vampires?
dreams.
Well,
Yep.
I've been reading horror when I was very, very young as well. I started with kind of point horror books, and then when I was about 15, I discovered sort of adult horror through Richard Lehman, and I read his entire back catalogue. And when I finished that, that's when I came across authors like Gordon, Simon, and a lot of other authors that I've been reading for a long time. And I had read and enjoyed Simon's, I think he says Vampyrrhic. I always thought it was Vampyrrhic.
All right.
And then I read Ray Garton's Live Girls, which was quite a famous sort of modern type of horror novel, horror vampires. You know, I loved movies like The Lost Boys and things like that. And then recently, or in the last few years, a few authors I enjoy, like Brian Keane. I forget the name of the vampire novella he released, but it was brilliant. It was great.
With teeth, maybe?
With teeth. It's kind of old school, almost Nosferatic type vampires, but in a different setting. And then you had Glenn Rolfe, until the summer comes along or something. I apologise, I'm terrible with names of books after I've read them, but it was a fantastic read. I've just read the sequel, which the name also escapes me. Tim Curran released something, Blood Devils. So there's been kind of vampire novels all along that I've enjoyed, that have had the kind of brutal vampires in them by authors that I really enjoy reading. And then maybe a year ago I released a vampire anthology myself. I felt like over the last sort of 10 years there's been loads of stuff that it wasn't the kind of vampires that I enjoyed, and I would say as well a lot of horror authors kind of steered clear of vampire fiction. It just, you know, there was maybe left a bad taste in some people's mouths. So I put an anthology together with some authors that I wanted to work with, and I wrote my own story for that book. I don't always do that when I put books together, and I enjoyed doing all of that. And then when we discussed doing vampire stories for this one, but albeit longer stories in novella length, I thought I would really like to do that. So that was why I think we all had our own reasons for the vampire novella thing. But I'm glad to see more of the type of vampires that I like coming through in short stories and novellas and things like that. And I hope more authors that enjoy reading bring something out in the vampire. I think it was God that said, you know, that going back to the classics. Obviously, he mentioned Jigsaw Man, which again has been one of my favourite books since I read it. I think, you know, it's good to hear retellings and different versions. You know, those monsters will never go away. There's certain monsters that people will be telling stories about 100 years' time. You know, vampires won't go away. People won't forget who Frankenstein is. Werewolves won't go away. There's certain, you know, monsters that are just genre monsters for horror lovers. And I suppose if you love horror and you read a lot of it, at some point you'll want to tell your own story in that arena. And vampires for me are just the last wee while, and I think, you know, I've seen people mention things about, oh, I hope I see more of this character, or other authors. I hope there's a sequel of this book, and I'm the same. I'm looking forward to more vampire fiction coming out over the next 5 years.
Definitely.
And as much as we joke about Twilight and all that kind of stuff, we all wish we'd written it, right? So,
have you read
it? I never did read it. I watched one of the movies, but I still wish I'd have read them. I wrote them all and made the paychecks that she did. So
yeah, I think we all wish we had our paychecks, not necessarily that we wrote the book.
Yeah. But I don't have any problem. Again, they brought a lot of, you know, teenage people into reading and all that stuff. I have no problem with any of that stuff, right?
You can't, it's for teens. It's, you know, I tried reading the first one.
100%. Yeah, it's not great, and it's certainly not what we enjoy and stuff like that. But I can certainly respect it. It's bringing people to read, and there's a lot of people that they just don't read any books, right? So I don't have any problem with them picking something like that up, and maybe that leads them leads them down the road to our fiction.
I've got a friend that's probably read them through 10 times,
Yeah.
just rereads them and rereads them. So they're for a certain audience, which is fair enough. As I say, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you like. I think horror fans obviously generally prefer things a little bit darker. I mean, like, True Blood. I watched the True Blood series. I read the books, and after 7 or 8 books, it felt a bit repetitive, and I fell away from it. But again, when I read horror, it's a bit more brutal, and there's just something in horror for me.
Well, it's so popular. I mean, because the vampire myth, well, it goes back as a myth, but I mean, the vampire fiction, what was it, Polidori with Vampire, and then about 1850, Varney the Vampire was published in pamphlet form in Britain, and I think it went on for years, for hundreds of installments. It was cheaply produced, but it was just enormously popular in 19th century Britain, and it was probably a time when lots of people couldn't actually read, so you could imagine that people would be gathered around the hearth in the house, and there'd be one person in the house who could read, and they'd have the latest installment of Varney the Vampire and read it to everybody else who couldn't read. But it was a kind of like it wasn't your aristocratic kind of story. It was like a working class vampire, and it was probably targeted at working class people. So it was factory workers and railway workers and farmers and people who worked in stores who were enjoying Varney the Vampire. And I don't know if anybody's actually anybody watching, or any of the three of you have read any of Varney the Vampire. But
I have not. No.
But I've never read it.
Yeah,
it's probably online, but it went on for years, and I think it was quite gruesome. It really appealed to that kind of Jack the Ripper age. For people reading, fictional gruesome stories, but as you say, I mean, then Bram Stoker came along, wrote Dracula, and then it's basically vampires have been reinvented. I think that's the key thing. They're reinvented about every 20 years, and of course, God did a brilliant job with Jigsaw Man reinventing Frankenstein, and I think that's the strength of horror, that these stories are reinvented, whether it's the haunted house, the reanimated monster, the zombie vampires, they just simply don't.
Even when you look at movies like Underworld and Blade and things like that, that's their action movies, really. They're no horrors.
Yeah.
There you get vampires and werewolves, but it's an action film. So, as you say, they're reinventing it, and it's been used in a lot of other genres. Probably you get your romance.
What about I Am Legend? Are the Draculas or zombies? Vampires or zombies for I Am Legend?
Are we talking the story or the bad movie with Will Smith?
The book.
Movie, they're a bit zombie-like. I prefer the book.
Yeah, I've always saw vampires because they only come out at night. I guess you can see it both ways. They're probably
Did they not wear sun cream in the book?
Yeah.
Did they not find something eventually? At first, they couldn't get to his house.
Yeah, they do start finding something, a way to get to him, right? So yeah. I always meant to ask him. I don't know, Simon, did you ever meet Richard Matheson? Or you ever have a chance to speak with him?
Never did. No.
I met him once at a convention. Yeah. I met him once,
brilliant!
I got him to sign something, but I didn't. There was a million people there. I always wanted to ask him what his take was on it, but I never did it.
And you said Lehman there. Lehman, as I said, was my introduction. I read about 40 of his books before I found another horror author.
Big influence on me as well. Amen.
By the time I found Richard Lehman's message board, which you'll probably know Richard Lehman Kills, he'd already passed away. So I actually got into that message board back in the days before Facebook and things like that. And it was actually Richard Lehman fans that recommended me probably 10 other authors that then...
Yep. And speaking of vampires, his book, The Stake, was a huge influential book in my...
Bite as well.
The Bite too, a Bite.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the one thing readers will enjoy most about your novella?
Who's going first?
Simon, go first.
Well, I just hope that it's going to be an interesting ride for them. I hope that they, I don't know. What will they enjoy? I mean, I do like to try and write something obviously that engages, but it's also sometimes it's like a bit like hypnosis. To write in such a way that that the words trigger things in people's minds. It makes me sound like it's some kind of Svengali or some kind of vampire figure in my own right, trying to mesmerize people. But
they'll love it, Simon. As soon as I read the first paragraph, I went, "Oh, this is Simon."
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
really, all you have to
Yeah.
say is Viking vampire, and people will
Yeah.
read it. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, the first visit back into the pub there where it starts, and I thought, "Oh, this is going to be good." I knew it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, people have enjoyed the Vampyrrhic novels and the spin-off Vampyrrhics,
They'll enjoy it.
and then hopefully they're going to enjoy this. It's again we're going to jokes here, but yeah, it's in the same vein. Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah, but it's a terrific question, Anita, because it's such a weird thing for writers. Because I don't know, by me personally, you don't truly write your story, with what you hope the reader's going to take out of it, right? You're kind of writing it for yourself in a lot of ways, right? You're writing what's making you happy and what pleases you in it. And then, of course, you hope that readers, enjoy it and there's things in it that they can relate to. But I think it has to sort of start from what's it doing for you as a writer? Like, why are you sitting down to take all this time to write it, right? And, for me, again, it was that sort of uniqueness of trying to write something that I love as far as being underwater and scuba diving and trying to relate it to a vampire scenario.
Well,
And
yeah, I think you do. I mean, and it's odd. I mean, perhaps I'm just going digressing a little bit here, but you probably found the same, Gord and Kevin and Anita, that you'll write something and you'll perhaps put something that seems fairly minor, and you think, oh, that's just a little bit of local colour. And perhaps you'll meet somebody at a convention and they'll say, wow, that part about the cat in the in a pub, I really like that about the cat. And you thought, oh, I've just put the cat in there as a bit of colour. It wasn't a big part of the story, but some people will pick up on things that you thought were quite insignificant in the story, but for them, it chimes. It's like pop music, isn't it? Even a very trite, almost like banal lyric can actually have a profound effect on the listener.
there's also that slight terror as a writer. When you're writing the story, it's all yours and nobody else has seen it or has any idea what's coming, right? And you have it, and then there's that total terror when you send it to somebody, right? You send it to the publisher or the editor or whatever, because now it's out into the world, right? Now you're open to, oh my God, this guy's crazy, right?
So,
But
what about you, Kevin? Do
we
you
do
have
it.
something that stands out in your story, do you think?
I think for myself, it's fast paced, which is my favourite sort of horror. I like loads of subgenres of horror. I think I'm quite widely read in the horror world, and the thing that's my least favourite is probably slow burn. So I go the opposite direction and try to keep the pace going throughout. And there's loads of action. I think for the story starts and kind of kicks in, things are happening, and there's a bit of action, and it's quite brutal, as I said, which is, as I say again, I read probably quite a lot of extreme horror, splatter punk horror, stuff where a high percentage of the story is probably violence, or it could be gross out or disgusting or just pushing people's boundaries or whatever it might be. I wouldn't call my story extreme, but as I say, I think that it's a novella. So obviously with novellas you can kind of have quite a good pace throughout. Normally if you've got a novel, then there's a bit more character building and more story building and things like that. But with a novella, I've switched over the last maybe 4 or 5 years to reading predominantly novellas, because I can squeeze them in. I can read them in a day or two often. If I read a novel, it takes me maybe 2 weeks, and I'm working on multiple projects and then losing place in my book and going back to it. So novellas work really well for me, and by the same token I enjoy writing them because you can just keep that pace from the start to the end. So people that enjoy fast-paced fiction with loads of action in it should hopefully enjoy it.
Okay.
I've been reading some of Kevin's novella. I can vouch for the speed of it and the excitement in Kevin's novella. So I had to recommend people do seek that out and read it.
Okay, so did you have any difficulties writing your stories?
Well, I'll jump in first then, since I just sort of finished it. I kind of stopped writing about 4 years ago when my father passed away. And during that time, I kind of focused on just doing the anthologies. And for anybody that kind of follows me closely, I stopped putting stories in the anthologies and focused just in bringing in the writers that I wanted for each book, picking the theme that I was keen on at the time and excited to maybe put something out there. If I started doing the anthologies, the very first one was a Christmas horror anthology. And at that point, I didn't feel there was a lot of modern Christmas horror out there. And then, as I said, with the vampire one, I wanted to see more brutal vampire stories out there. So I went and asked some authors to write them. So I've only been got back into writing recently over the last few while. As I say, and I think for me, going to do a full length novella was quite a big step. But having Simon and Gord agreeing to write something alongside me was quite a good motivation to write the story, start it, finish it. But the difficulty was just getting, but I hadn't been writing many short stories, which is really what I've mostly done. I've only wrote one solo novella previously. So just forcing myself to stick at it, sit down every night in front of the laptop, add a little bit, cut bits out. It was just sort of getting back involved in the writing process and doing something at that length. But as I said, I really wanted to feature alongside these two guys. So that was my sort of driving force to get
Simon and I finished our story first, so we put the pressure on Kevin to to get his butt in his chair and finish it, right? So
got there in the end. But it was that was my difficulty. Was just getting back to. God kind of touched on it when you're writing. It's okay. It's the thought of putting it out there. Because when you're writing it, you don't know. You like the story you're writing it. It's your story you want to tell. You maybe get stuck. You get past it. You write another bit. You might think it's brilliant. You might not be sure. You might be wherever you're sitting. But when you put it out there, then you're going to find out. People are going to come back to tell you it was good, it was bad, and reviewers can be brutal. It's on Goodreads, it's on Amazon. People are going to leave their thoughts. And again, not having put a lot of stuff out there, and because I think my anthologies do quite well, but they're filled with other writers, I'm used to getting kind of relatively good praise for the books, but it's your own stuff. So it's probably you're taking more of a hit if it's not well received. So as I say, they were the sort of stumbling blocks for me.
I'll go next. And my hardest part was actually keeping it short. I went way over the word limit to start with. Again, when I first have had this idea for a while, it was going to be, I thought of it as a novel the entire time. And there were so many scenes that I sort of wanted to write, especially like down under the water. I wanted to find some air pockets down in the caves in the old mines, and I wanted to write some scenes down there, like in the mines and things like that. And just every time I checked the word length, I was already way overboard on everything. So my biggest difficulty was keeping it short enough not to turn it into too long of a story. So
Okay, so what about you, Simon? Did you have any difficulties?
Well, for me, I guess the main, if not like difficulty, the main concern was that would I be able to go back to this fictional town of Leppington that had created before and make it believable, make it feel as if it was still a real place, which I think worked with the original Vampyrrhic novel. I was probably about the most pleased in creating an actual town that felt so real to me when I was writing about the Leppington in the original novel. And so it's like feeling my way back into that and thought, well, would it seem authentic to me? And if it didn't feel authentic to me, the notion of this big spooky hotel in a little market town in Yorkshire, that was close to the moors and the wind whistling through the town, I wanted to really create an interesting atmosphere and a spooky, eerie atmosphere. And it did feel like coming home. It felt as if I got off the train in Leppington and it was pretty much as I'd left it 20 years ago, and it was still there. And when I started writing about it, it came to life, because I think a big important part of the original Vampyrrhic novel was the town, that the town itself was a character in the novel and played such an important part in it, and you know, it's an eerie, strange, you know, fairly dismal place, really. And I wanted to, you know, re-enter that and bring it back to life. And then when the town was real again to me, and when the characters I put into it would instantly become real as well. You know, they'd be moving it, you know, through this town. You know, they'd be having the, you know, encountering dangerous thing. You know, they'd be having the conversations. They'd be facing danger. And for me, when the town became real in my head, then the rest of the story became real and the characters became real to me. So yeah, that was probably the trickiest part. But then, you know, it felt as though it really did take off, and I was very pleased.
When I originally read the book, I didn't actually know it was a fictional town. It's well written.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I had no idea. I didn't know. Like, I found out years later, but I didn't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's lots of towns like that in Yorkshire, and they all have they generally all have a station hotel, and it's always a huge hotel that's disproportionate. I can't say it. It's big compared to the other buildings. You know, it looms there as this kind of like these station hotels in Yorkshire that the loom out of the townscape almost like a fortress, and they all seem quite mysterious places, and in a way separate to the town, a bit otherworldly, because it's really caters for people who are passing through on the railways. So I wanted to write about that originally, and I'm pleased I brought it back in the novella. So, you know, thanks to Kevin for asking me to take part. Otherwise, it wouldn't have existed.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you guys have a favorite scene that you wrote in the books?
Definitely.
Okay, so tell us, Gord.
I don't know if it's a spoiler or not. There's a scene. Of course, my entire novella is about a creature in a lake, right? A vampire creature in a lake. But I had a really sort of moment where I realized that there's no lid on this lake. Then perhaps my creature that was a man didn't have to be contained to this lake, that he could actually come out of the lake. And I seen him sort of in my mind standing on the beach and thinking, well, if he's on the beach, maybe he could go for a walk. And there's a scene in a swimming pool that is my absolute favorite in the novella. So that's as much as I'm given to give you.
Okay, so what about you, Kevin? Do you have a favorite scene?
Probably much like God. I won't go too much into it, but the battle scene, which is obviously towards the end of the book, is my favourite scene. It allowed me to show the ferocity of the vampires and the werewolves, and they're fighting demons. So, you know, which you find out before the end anyway, so it's not really wasting too much. But I like writing battle scenes. I like writing big fight scenes, and I think as well as you get close at the end of your book, you kind of try to up your game and give the reader a wee bit more. You know, you're building, and then you're wanting sort of big finale. So the closer you get to the end, and the more the violence kicks in, and the excitement and the pacing keeps speeding up. As I say, that's towards the end is my favourite bit.
Okay, so what about you, Simon? Do you have a favorite scene?
For me, yeah. I mean, like Kevin, I mean, I really do enjoy writing the action scenes, but perhaps one of the favourite scenes, to avoid any spoilers, is in beneath the hotel. There's a huge basement, a great Gothic basement, really quite an eerie one. And in the basement wall is a sealed door, an iron door, and it's also a mystery to generally to people who visit the hotel or and happen to go into the basement. Why is this huge metal door sort of embedded in the wall, and where does it lead to? And I've once seen where the main character goes down, and it's not gone through the door yet. He doesn't really know what's beyond it. He's being told there's tunnels that have been basically very dangerous ones that are collapsing, so the door's been sealed. And he goes up to the door, and he's all alone in the cellar. It's night, and he touches the door. He feels drawn to it, and he can feel, almost sense that there's somebody or something on the other side, and he gets the feeling that there's almost like a mirror image of somebody on the other side of the door, and they're doing the same as him. They've come up close to the door, and this metal door on the other side, and they're touching it as if trying to divine, who might be on the other side, and put in their ear to the door and listen if there's anybody in the cellar. And my character's doing the same thing. He's got his ear to this huge iron door, and he's sure there's somebody on the other side, and they're doing the same thing, that they're listening and trying to hear if there's somebody in the cellar. And for me, that gave me goosebumps, which I was really pleased. I love writing the action scenes, but I like it if I can think I've pulled off an eerie scene where it might put a cold shiver down the reader's spine. So I'm hoping that works. So
you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it took me back to the first novel, which I'm assuming is it the same basement at the same door, or am I mixing it? I read it.
Yeah. I'll just be 1 second, Anita. I'll be right back. Just carry on.
I read Vampyrrhic years and years and years ago, but when I was reading your short story, when you sent it to me in Glord, I'm thinking, well, that links straight back. A lot of the things, but you know how your memory's not always 100%, so I'm like, that's the same sort of door?
It is, yes. I just love the notion of that in a cellar there'd be a door which appears to lead to a tunnel. I think that goes back to almost like childhood. I've always been fascinated by the idea of, I guess, to bring that almost like psychology terms, the basement is a liminal area. It's a strange borderland between the hotel upstairs, which has got nice carpets, and the bar with the beers and wines. And you go down into the cellar, and it's quite eerie and strange and different from the rest of the building. And then also there's a door to another place, potentially another world beneath the town. And I was like those liminal places like beaches and like God's fascination with scuba diving. I've never been scuba diving, but I've been skin diving, and I love that notion where you just can transition from the world of air into the world of being underwater. And it's almost like traveling into space. You go underwater and you're just in this different world where different rules apply and where dangerous things might lurk.
Definitely. So what appeals to you about writing horror in general?
I can
shall
probably
continue
jump
with that
in.
one.
No, you go ahead, Simon. Yep.
Yeah, mine's going to be brief. It's just something that's always fascinated me. I don't know. I think it's this notion, that I developed from a very young age that we live in this world, but it sometimes feels as though there are other worlds just on the other side of the iron door, or just outside our front door, or another world in the river that we walk by. That if you were to plunge into the water, what would you find under there? So I think almost like that attraction for horror is the discovering the other place, or the person from the other place, who intrudes into our world.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's basically my take on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like we're all afraid of something, right? We all have our fears, and whether they're open fears or the ones we have inside us, we don't tell people about. And it doesn't always have to be, like with horror, when we talk about, there's so many different variants of horror, right? From the quiet horror all the way up to the axe wielding maniac, right? But horror doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be someone chasing you with a chainsaw. It's all about that fear, and someone conquering that fear. I do a lot of talks at like libraries and bookstores and things like that about fear. Someone's just in a mall and walking with their son, and they turn around, the little guy's gone. There's that fear. That's horror, right? That where is he? Even if you see him, he's 20 feet over there. Okay, fine. But for that moment when he was gone, that's real horror. Like a woman in the shower, maybe doing a breast exam, and she finds a lump. That's a horrific moment in her life. She like those are all horror to me, and we try to understand that through our fiction, right? You write about your own personal fears. The Jigsaw Man, which is my biggest selling book, it's a modern day Frankenstein, but it's also about the helplessness that I felt like. My daughter had liver transplant surgeries when she was a little baby, and now the story has nothing to do with little girls or liver transplants, but it has everything to do with that helplessness that I had, that I couldn't do anything to help her, and my main character is in that helpless position where they keep cutting parts off of him, and and then eventually rebuilding him. But uh, that to me is what real horror and it's us trying to describe the fear in the world that we have, and that for me anyway. And it also sounds kind of weird. It's a therapy to write to start with. So and I can sort of, you talk to horror people, think we're not crazy. We're actually very happy and fun people to go to conventions with, because I think we have that ability to write out some of that anxiety and that stress that we feel in real life. And when I do write it, I feel better and it's gone. Right, I have a way of sort of getting rid of it. So it sounds awful to say I'll go in the basement and kill a few people and I feel a lot better, but there's reality to it, right? It is a therapy for me, and I can deal with some of this stress and some of the fear that's out there in the world, and that's how I deal with it. And I think a lot of horror writers are kind of similar to that.
Yeah, a lot of horror writers have said the same thing that I've interviewed.
Yeah.
So what about you, Kevin? What appeals to you about writing horror?
I think I'm just the weird kid. I think from memory, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and when my mum and dad used to go to bed, occasionally I'd sneak into the living room, I'd watch the television, I'd turn it on, they'd be sleeping. And in the UK back then, you had 3 or 4 channels, there was no cable, there was no Sky, so you were limited. And I ended up at a very, very, very young age watching The First Nightmare on Elm Street, which was quite scarring, but I liked it. And I like that feeling scared. I suppose it's like going on a roller coaster. People go to theme parks, they go on stuff that's going to scare them. The adrenaline pumps, they get a buzz and they enjoy it and they go and do it again. And for me, that was horror. And when I was young, even like in all the cartoons that were out, like Scooby Doo, although it always turned out to be a person, there was a different monster in every episode. I liked comic books with vampires and werewolves and Frankenstein's monster and different things, and I was just drawn to it. It always liked that. When I used to draw wee doodles, I would draw a vampire or I'd draw a wolf, things like that. And it progressed into when the Scholastic Book Fair used to come into the school, I would always get the point in horror books. And then, as I say, by the age of 15, I had to write an essay as part of my 4th year at, well, again, in the UK, we call it 4th year. I think it's like 11th year in America, but it was high school. And you had to write an essay as part of your overall English exam results for the 2 years. And I randomly picked up a book at a sale, a jumbo sale, called Darkness Tellers. I bought it because there was a Ouija board in the front of it, and I had an interest in Ouija boards. And that was Richard Lemon's, the first book I read by him, which made me fall into reading all his books. And as I say, it's just continued and continued. I found other horror authors I liked. Eventually, through my love of reading horror, I wrote a short story which got accepted into a book. A year later, I put a horror anthology together. A few years later, I wrote a novella. And a few years after that, I'm sitting talking to you guys. So it's just kind of been a gradual process for about the age of 5. And it's just kind of been a natural progression that I've not really chased. I've just always enjoyed it, and one thing's led to another, and as I said, here we are.
Yeah. And we also all love the millions of dollars that it brings in, and in royalties, and
The money's insane.
the endless bags of money. Yes.
Oh, okay. And so on that note, tell us what you are going to be writing next. What's your next project coming up that will make you more of these millions? So,
Yeah.
okay,
Simon. Whoever.
Start with Kevin.
Kevin. Okay.
What's your next project?
So, just before my father, about a year before my father passed away, I'd been working Halloween Land, which got released just after he passed away from memory, and then everybody had liked a character in it that I just named the Clown. So I decided to give her a backstory and write a novella specifically about her, and it's a prequel to Halloween Land. So that is almost finished, and it will be out early October this year. So I went out for Halloween, same as I've done with Halloween Land. But my next book that I'm releasing is an anthology that it's the 20th book in the horror collection series, and it's the Splatterpunk edition. So that will be available. It's up for pre-order and it would hit your Kindle in about 3 weeks. But if I get it finished early, then I'll bring that forward, and everybody will get it a wee bit early.
Okay, so what about you, Gord? What's coming up next for you?
A few things. I wrote a novella 10, 12 years ago called The Dark Side of Heaven. It's kind of a horror fantasy. It's about a Vietnam vet that kind of wants to commit suicide, but he doesn't want to do that to his parents because his twin brother's already been killed in the war in Vietnam, and he volunteers for tunnel rat duty, sort of hoping to die down there. But instead of dying, what he actually finds down in the tunnels is a back door into heaven, into purgatory, and he gets a chance to go across sort of between heaven and hell to find his brother and find some other people and then lead them back across towards the gates of heaven. It's a book I've really always enjoyed, but at the time I had to get it out and kind of rushed it through a little bit, and I always had a bunch of other ideas. So I'm turning that into a full-length novel. I'm nearly finished it now, so that's coming up shortly. And the other big project I'm on the go is I've written several short stories in the past, all set in the same criminally insane asylum called Ashbury Creek Asylum. So
Is that where Peeler's set?
yes, my Beeler is a story that was set there. I think that was the second story I ever set there. Chopper's Hands. That was before that. But I noticed I had a bunch of stories set in the same asylum, and so I wanted to put a whole collection together of all stories set in this same location. And actually, the story that's going to be in you were just talking about your splatterpunk anthology that's coming out next. My story in there, Sister Silence and Lady Strange, is set in that same asylum. So I have a few more stories to write for it, but I already have a full brand new novella set in there that has never been published before. I'm going to hold that off for the collection as well. So that's kind of what's next for me.
Okay, so what about you, Simon? What's next for you?
Yeah, quite a few years ago in the 1990s, I wrote a book called Blood Crazy. And basically the idea is that everybody over the age of 19 becomes murderously insane and starts attacking younger people. It's after a long, long time I decided to bring it back as a series. So the third one, the third volume 3 is just out now, Blood Crazy, 8 and Present. So I'm really pleased to bring that back. Coming up next is a novelization of a film. I wrote a film script a few years ago, and that's been made into a film. There isn't a release date yet for the film, and that's forthcoming. But I'm wanting to get a novel ready for when it appears. The film's called Protos, and of course the novel's called Protos as well. So I'm just putting the finishing touches to that, and hopefully that will be out in a couple of months. Yeah, it's a dystopian novel which involves really quite nasty experiments conducted on prisoners, on people on death row. So it's quite gruesome, but there's some twists and adventures in there as well. So perhaps it's not as bleak as it might seem.
Well, I'll buy it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You got one sale.
I finished reading
Yes,
the third Blood Crazy book about 15 minutes before we come on here. It was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Kevin and I are both big fans of Simon. If you haven't figured that out yet,
Yeah, okay. So, well, it sounds like you guys got a lot of projects coming up, so we'll look forward to that. And you can check out Dark Tide 17, Creatures of the Night. The link is in the description. And I think we'll wrap the interview up here. And I'd like to thank you all for being a guest today and surviving the internet, because it did not cooperate with us a lot. So that's it for this interview, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.